Hello and welcome everyone to TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers. I am your host, Peter Edwards, today, and TTELT is a project of educators worldwide. And today we have one of EW's board members as our guest, Dr. Aileen Hale. She is a board member from Florida in the USA and is a global educator. So welcome, Dr. Hale. It's great to see you again. And thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's a pleasure to see you again.
So this month, we're focusing on project-based learning. And today, Aileen, you're telling us a bit about service learning. And can you tell us how service learning fits into project-based learning?
Yes, Peter, thanks. That's a great question. I think service learning at its core is project-based learning. However, project-based learning is not necessarily service learning. They have a lot of commonality. If you were to do a Venn diagram, you could see a lot of overlap between things like finding problems to solve, collaborating with classmates, doing a lot of critical thinking, reflection, and civic responsibility often comes into both project-based learning and service learning. However, I think one of the fundamental differences is that service learning is really meeting a community need. And as such, it's more student driven, because in project-based learning, often, not always, but teachers or instructors are the ones who help design the projects for the students. Whereas in an ideal service learning situation, the students would work in groups and determine different types of service that they would address in the community, whether it be a homelessness project for the community. Again, it's a project, but it's serving the greater good of the community. So the service is a unique aspect of, in America, we think of it as like volunteerism, doing something for the community, where we're serving the community for the betterment of the community. So again, it has that civic responsibility sense to it. But I think in that, it also gives a really high motivation for students, because it's student driven. They're the ones that are identifying the problem, if you will, and coming up with solutions, how they can address this problem within the community in such a way that it serves the community for the greater good, and again, serves as a motivation for students learning, because they're really engaging at a whole nother level in the community through addressing the community need. Does that answer your question in a nutshell?
Beautifully, yes, that's really exciting and such an important thing to do to contribute to the community. Thank you for telling us that. And could you share any personal experiences that you might have about how you get students engaged in service learning?
Yes, I have a plethora of examples. It's always hard to choose which ones to share. Probably one of the most recent ones, well, this seemed a long time ago, but recently I was in Albania working as an English language fellow and tried to get my students out of the classroom. And that's another thing that differentiates service learning from project-based learning, is going out of the classroom. Oftentimes project-based learning can happen in the walls of the classroom. It doesn't have to go out of the classroom. It could be either or, whereas service learning generally should be something that goes out of the classroom and meets a community need. So students do a lot of work outside of class where they determine a need in the community. In this case, in Albania, we focus on a need of taxi drivers needing English to serve an international clientele. And there is a growing international clientele, particularly in the capital of Tirana, where I was working. And we noticed as foreigners that a lot of the taxi drivers had very, very little English. And when you get into a cab in a foreign country, the first thing you want to be able to communicate is how you want to get somewhere. And it feels very nerve-wracking, if you will, if you can't communicate with your driver. You're already hesitant as a foreigner in a foreign country, and not knowing if they're really going to take you where you think you're going can be disconcerting. So giving both the client in the taxi in this case, but more important, the taxi driver, the skills to give the client the assurance, was the project. So our students created bilingual Albanian and English brochures for the clients and for the taxi drivers. But most importantly, it was to help the taxi drivers with their English skills so that they could serve their clientele and gain more clients having English as an asset for the taxi drivers. That's one example.
Okay, if you have another, please share it.
Sure. I used to work in Boise, Idaho, and I helped develop some service learning projects for a K-8 school where we had a Latino community very close to an Anglo community, but there was not much, little to no interaction between the communities. So we intentionally designed projects to build bridges between the communities. There were I say little, like small projects for younger kids where we had the Latinos teach the Anglo kids how to make tortillas. And then the Anglo kids would sell tortillas on behalf of the Latino congregation. This was at a church to help support their church. So there's just one quick example to how to raise funds, but it was like a collaborative project where they were both teaching each other and doing something for each other. So it was a mutual exchange, but serving one another to raise funds for the community need. That's one quick example.
That's great. That's wonderful. Expanding beyond the classroom to the whole community. It's really exciting. It's great stuff. Within this world of service learning, within the greater world of project-based learning, what tips do you have that you can give to teachers?
Yeah. One, find ways that you're really meeting a community need. What I mean is, so you could do this several different ways. You as an instructor can go into the community ideally and spend some time yourself to kind of discern those needs. You can bring the ideas to the students and let them have choice. I think that's really important that your students take ownership of the service project rather than, again, in problem-based learning, oftentimes the instructor just brings the problem to the students and the students have to solve the problem, which is very valuable for learning language. However, I think the motivation level is that much higher when the students take that ownership of the project that they're solving, if you will, in the community. Another example that comes to mind is solving an issue of homelessness in a community, and not to minimize serving food at a homeless shelter, which is a great project in and of itself, but doing the critical thinking side of it is, why do we have this growing homeless population in our city? And what can we do to really solve the problem for the people who are homeless on the streets? I don't think anybody really chooses to be homeless. So the critical thinking skills part of it is really important. I think as a teacher that you think of yourself as a facilitator. You're giving the students choice, you're giving them the opportunity to have leadership in the projects and choice for how they discover ways to solve the problems in the community.
Wow, that's beautiful. It really it warms my heart. I myself did a little bit of starting my teaching working with adults illiteracy problems in prisons in Pennsylvania. I love how you've brought this to such a large scale, and it really makes the learning have a great purpose. So before we finish up, Aileen, do you have any last comments to tell our listeners today?
Thanks, Peter. I think examples I gave was to kind of cover the spectrum of ages. So I want our listeners to know that service learning can be applied from kindergarten through higher ed, university and beyond. And I think often teachers don't see that ability. That's why I gave the simple example of making tortillas, that it's a simple thing, but it's how you do it and the purpose of what you're doing it for. And you as a teacher are the facilitator. You're like in the background, but helping students dig deeper. What are we really doing and why are we doing it? And how is it really serving the community? And how are we building bridges, if you will, for the betterment of our community?
That really is, it's beautiful, and it just makes the learning experience all the more meaningful. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Aileen Hale, for explaining a little bit more about what is service learning in the broader scope of project-based learning. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you. And we'll see everybody in the next episode. Thank you.